Got my eyes straight ahead, got my head in the game. With the red light on, I'm just waiting for the change. Get my head down low.
Hi, Jay Fallon. Thanks for listening to The Slippery Slope. Alex Berenson put out a new report over the weekend. Actually, just today, sorry. Talking about two reports that have come out, two investigative pieces that have come out. One's from the UK, another's a Substack report, both offering more proof that SARS-CoV-2 came from the Chinese laboratory. He asked the questions, will the elite US media take note, or people like the reporter Catherine Wu, who's been sprouting the story about the virus coming from raccoon dogs. So anyway, it seems like there is evidence that it is definitely from the laboratory, which, I mean, any common sense person has to be looking at it thinking, well, that seems like the most obvious place that you would look. However, what Alex is saying here is absolutely true. The elite media, who it seems like they've just been paid off by the Chinese government, possibly by the American government, ignore where all the facts seem to be pointing and want to push us off to any other narrative. Even here in Australia, the Australian government's still pushing the narrative that this was a naturally occurring event, came from the wet markets next door. You can ignore, it's just a wild conspiracy theory if you think it came from the laboratory. However, more and more evidence stacking up, which would seem to point to the obvious. Another, probably something very concerning, which I hadn't really thought about until he was thinking about it. But if you think about all the intelligence services that would obviously know the truth, as Alex says that he discusses how American intelligence services appear to have engaged in a 3-year conspiracy of silence to hide what they know about the lab leak. Even here in Australia, you understand how much intel comes out. When they do release things, you realize how much the depth of their intelligence is an organization like ASIO. And to sit back and think, oh yeah, well, they had no idea. They just simply did not know, couldn't put the pieces together, had no intel to be able to join the dots and say, oh, this came from the laboratory. Has to be a conspiracy of silence from all of these intelligence services. It is simply not credible that an organization like the CIA or even Australia's own ASIO, and he says even more importantly, the National Security Agency, have no idea what happened in the fall of 2019 at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the Chinese lab that is the likely source of SARS-CoV-2. As he says, compare the incredible detail the United States has on Russia's intentions and even troop-level movements in Ukraine with its supposed inability to make an even vague disclosure about a medium-security, quasi-civilian Chinese lab where Western researchers sometimes worked. And yet we heard nothing from any of these intelligence agencies. So presumably, spy agencies have stayed quiet at the behest of Western leaders who have no appetite to inflame tensions with China over what was likely an accident. If, as he says, if SARS-CoV-2 was a bioweapon, it was incredibly poorly designed. Although it did kill a lot of people, it barely sickens healthy fighting age men. Anyway, so continuing on, so the Times of London article, which was published on Saturday, it begins by saying that scientists in Wuhan working alongside the Chinese military were combining the world's most deadly coronaviruses to create a new mutant virus just as the pandemic began. Investigators who scrutinized top secret intercepted communications and scientific research believe Chinese scientists were running a covert project of dangerous experiments. which caused a leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology and started the COVID-19 outbreaks. Unfortunately, the article does not detail further who the investigators were or how they had access to the information. However, as Alex says, the Times of London is almost 240 years old and widely considered among Britain's best newspapers. The article also contains stunning detail that the Chinese army had its own vaccine specialist. I'll try and pronounce the name, forgive me if it's wrong, Zhao Yusen, a decorated military scientist at the academy. He was working at the lab at the time of the outbreak. In May 2020, when he was aged just 54, Zhao appears to have died, a fact mentioned only in passing in a Chinese media report and in a scientific paper that placed the word deceased in brackets after his name. Witnesses are said to have told the US investigation that Zhao fell from the roof of the Wuhan Institute, although this has not been verified. Crikey. Meanwhile, in this other report, Michael Schellenberger, Matt Taibbi, and Alex Gutentag reported on Tuesday in Schellenberg's public Substack that sources within the US government say that 3 of the earliest people to be infected with SARS-CoV-2 were Ben Hu, H-U, next person, Yu Ping, and the third person, Yan Zhu. All were members of the Wuhan lab suspected to have leaked the pandemic virus. Did you get that? 3 of the earliest people. So, just going by what's happening here in Australia, what our government's told us, they have continued with the narrative that this virus came from the wet markets next door, was naturally occurring, nothing to do with the Wuhan laboratory. That's just wild conspiracy. And yet, three people who were among the first people who were infected with this virus all worked at the Wuhan laboratory, the Wuhan lab. And yet we're still told here in Australia, just wild conspiracy theory. Wow. So Schellenberg's piece also does not disclose the precise sources of its information, referring only to sources within the US government. But in Berenson's experience, he said Schellenberg is a careful and accurate reporter. Listen, if you can, I would read these both of these reports from Schellenberg and from the UK Times of London. Very interesting. Like I said, it's probably all reasonable thinking people, anyone who can think something through and doesn't want anyone who can think things through logically can see that the obvious source of the leak was from the laboratory. Okay, that's just obvious. However, our governments, what I think is concerning is our governments continue to push this narrative that it naturally occurring event, that it came from the wet markets or some other dog raccoon or something like that. And when you think about it, Berenson's right. When you think that all of our intelligence agencies have just sat back and not said anything, not said a single word, very concerning about they would be a part of a conspiracy of silence. Anyway, I'd encourage you to read the reports for yourself. Interesting reading. My opinion, as I said all along, is that the Charlie Victor pandemic came from the laboratory. No doubt about it in my mind. You know, to say otherwise, believing otherwise would be like believing that Jeffrey Epstein actually did commit suicide. The whole thing's laughable. That's just my opinion. Check it out. Thanks for listening to The Slippery Slope.
They just fuel a desire that will take me higher. I'm on fire because 'cause nothing's gonna bring